Okay, which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the example? So I'm logically completing the text here with a quantitative data example. So something from the table will help me finish the premise that will be the first part of the question that will justify or explain what happened, what the first part of the paragraph is saying. So without further ado, let's read the paragraph and try to figure out what that is. Some researchers studying indigenous actors and filmmakers in the United States have turned their attention to the early days of cinema, particularly the 1910s, 20s, when people like blah, blah, blah were involved in one way or another with numerous films. In fact, so many of the films and associated records for this era have been lost that counts of those four figures, these are the four figures, output should be taken as a bare minimum rather than totals. So these numbers should be more. It's entirely possible, for example, so we're going to have an example. So in general, everyone's numbers should be more. So let's see the examples that will be more. So Lillian St. should be more than 66 acting jobs, for example. Dark Cloud acted in significantly fewer films than Lillian Sincere. Okay, that's true, but it is not answering the question. So this is a typical wrong answer on the data quantitative questions with tables and charts. It's true, the answer, but it doesn't answer the question. Edwin Carou's 47 credited acting roles included only films made after 1934. We'd have no idea. No, it's not true. This one's simply not true according to the table, so that can't be the right answer because his 47 acting roles were before 34, according to the table. Lillian Sincere acted in far more than 66 films. Yeah, that would probably be right? It has to be greater than 66 because these numbers should be the minimum. And Carou directed more than 58. So Carou was a director for 58 according to the table, so it should be greater than 58. That's the right answer. That's consistent with the premise and the background, that these should be bare minimums, the numbers in the table. D, James Young Deere actually directed 33 films and acted in 10. So they're saying they're switching out the numbers between Deere. No, that's not the idea, right? They mixed it up, acting versus the other. No, that's not the right idea. C is the answer. Okay. Which choice uses data from the table to support? We want to support the underlined claim, okay? So let's read the paragraph. Swahili is estimated to be the first language of up to 15 million people worldwide, their first language, and that's across the world. Notice we only have 3 countries in our table. That's not worldwide, okay? It's also an officially recognized language in Tanzania, Kenya, and the DRC, which is what's shown here, which means these countries use Swahili in government documents and proceedings. Here's our underlined claim that we need to support. But we're going to get a contrasting idea, even in countries where almost everyone speaks Swahili. So what countries do everyone speak Swahili here? These 2, right? Not the DRC, because a minority, 25%, speak Swahili there. So for many, it isn't their first language, but it is instead their second, third, or fourth language. So Tanzania has approximately 61 million Swahili speakers, right? Okay, that seems to be true according to the table, which is much more than the estimated total number of people worldwide for whom Swahili is their first language. Okay, so that means a lot of their Swahili speakers, couldn't possibly be first language. Even if all the Swahili, the first languages, were in Tanzania, then it would still be the majority would be non-first language Swahili speakers. So in other words, it would be 61 minus 15, which would be 46, that did not speak Swahili first, even in Tanzania. And that looks like it could well be the right answer here. Let's keep going. That's kind of a tricky postulate there, tricky answer. Tanzania is estimated to have at most 15 million Swahili speakers. No, it says Tanzania has approximately 61 million Swahili speakers. It could only be 15 million first language speakers. So yeah, that's not right. That's not true, according to the table and the text. Approximately 100% of the people who speak Swahili as their first language live in Kenya, which has a total population of 55. So if they all lived in Kenya, 15 lived in Kenya, that were their first language speakers, does that support, even in countries or almost, so that is one of our countries where speak Swahili. For many, it isn't their first language, but it's instead their second, third. So that would leave 40 million in Kenya who are not first language speakers. Okay, that seems kind of similar to A. Let's keep going. We'll come back to those. D, approximately 100% of Kenya's population speaks Swahili. So 100% of Kenya's population speaks Swahili. Okay, that's not true, according, that is true, sorry. Well, only 25% of the DRC of the Congo speaks Swahili. Okay, yeah, but that's information in the table. It says nothing about, in most cases, Swahili is not the first language, even in countries where everyone speaks Swahili. So the first condition, everyone speaks Swahili, are these two countries, Kenya and Tanzania, okay? And the claim is, for many, it isn't their first language, but instead their second, third, or even fourth language. Well, there can only be 15 million first language Swahili speakers worldwide. So whether it's Kenya, whether they're all in Kenya or all in Tanzania, it's still many people in each of those countries would only speak Swahili as a second or third language. So let's go back and check A and C. A, Tanzania, that's one of our possibilities, has approximately 61 million Swahili speakers, which is much more than the estimated total number of people worldwide for whom Swahili is their first language. So that, because that's more than the worldwide total, that means most, or many of them at least, because it doesn't say most, it says many, that they must not be first language speakers. Okay. C says approximately 100% of the people who speak Swahili as their first language live in Kenya. Well, no, we don't have to have all of them living in Kenya, which has a total of 55. Okay. Okay, I think I see the difference. So my problem with A and C is they both logically lead to the same conclusion. If 15 million people are first language speakers in either Tanzania or Kenya, then the majority of the other people in that country must be second language speakers, which is the underlying condition. I'm reading C as though it's the premise, but remember the question says you must use data from the table. Nothing in the table says, as in answer choice C, that the 100% or 15 million first language speakers live in Kenya. That is just not the case. So A relies, or C relies on that particular detail, which is not in the table. And again, the question requires us to use only data from the table, not a new premise that's not in the table. That's what C does. A doesn't do it. Therefore, A is the right answer. Very tricky. Be careful of that. So everything could be right. It could lead to the same conclusion, but you must use data from the table. The answer choice itself cannot put forth a new premise not in the table that you're relying on. Let's read this one. Which choice uses data from the table to most effectively support the researcher's conclusion? Okay, so strengthen, weaken using data from the table. And we have to figure out what is the conclusion we need to support. So let's go ahead and read this. Ecologists so-and-so investigated within species competition among common toads, a species that secretes various unpleasant tasting toxins called whatevers in response to threats. So as they're threatening, they produce this toxin. The researcher tested tadpoles' responses to different levels of competition by creating ponds with different tadpole population densities. Okay, I've got density and I've got high, medium, low. Okay, so I have more and more tadpoles in the different ponds. But a fixed amount of food. So fixed amount of food. Based on analysis, so that's more competition, the higher the density, because there's only limited food. Based on analysis of the tadpoles after 3 weeks, the researchers concluded that increased competition drove bufadiene, the toxin production, at the expense of growth. So let's see, we had more toxin, less growth. So average body mass, that would be less growth. And number of toxins, average amount per tadpole, average toxin per milligram of body mass. That would be it. That would be important. So what does this tell us? As the competition increased, we had more toxins per body mass. So it drove the toxin production per body mass. And the body mass itself even went down. So I think that's going to be our evidence, those two columns, as competition increased. Let's see which answer might match that. The difference in average tadpole body mass was small between the low and medium population density conditions and substantially larger between the low and high. Between low and, no, that has nothing to do, that does not answer our question. Okay? And we want to actually find the toxin production at the expense of growth. That says nothing to that. That's just growth. Tadpoles in the low and medium population densities conditions had substantially lower average toxin concentrations. Yeah, I think so. That was it, right? So in low and medium population densities, they had lower toxin per body mass, but had greater average body masses than those in the high population density condition. They had higher body masses, so they had more growth and lower concentration, suggesting the higher had less growth and much more toxin concentration. That looks pretty good. I think that's going to meet it. Note again, this one's a little tricky just because the names, the bufadinols names and the body mass, the information in the chart makes it just a little tricky to follow versus reading the differences of the conditions. Tadpoles, let's check C and D as a result. Tadpoles in the high population density condition displayed a relatively modest increase in the average amount of bufanidol. So in the high population, they had a slight increase in average toxin concentration. No, they had a big increase from 230 to 374, but roughly double the average concentration. Oh, wait, so that actually modest average amount of bufanidol. Okay, we're talking about average amount. So, maybe it is true. Actually, I was looking at the wrong column. The amount bufanidol column is this column. But again, that's not going to be relevant. So this might be true, but I don't think this one's relevant. Let's read it one more time. Tadpoles in the high population density condition displayed a relatively modest increase in the average amount, but roughly double the average concentration compared to those in the low population concentration. So they definitely double the concentration. The fact that they only went up modestly in the total amount of, that's really not saying too much. The conditions are lower body mass, higher concentration of toxin per body mass. I think that's the wrong column there. That's not going to be right. D, tadpoles produced approximately the same number of different toxins per individual across the population density conditions, but average tadpole body mass decreased as density decreased. Okay, that might be true. Again, we're getting that confusing. Toxins per individual for distinct. That's the second column. Again, that second column really does not tell us our story. That's not going to be right. I believe it's B. Let's go back and read it again, just given the different, variations of the columns, which are a little confusing. Tadpoles in the low and medium population density had substantially lower toxin concentrations. That is true, circled right there. Okay, and that's significant because we want to find the amount of production of the toxin at the expense of growth. So more toxin per amount of body mass, which is that last column. So, okay, that looks true and supports the claim, but greater body masses than those in the high population. So the absolute body mass was greater, and it is. So that supports our 2 points. It's true and it's relevant, which of course has to be the case for pretty much every one of these quantitative or data-related command of evidence problems. This is correct. Again, this is a tricky one to read with the different names and meanings of the different columns.